The ultimate question isn't how a man survives the silence, but how he transforms that silence into a promise. What happens when the act of being watched becomes the watcher's own undoing? And what forgotten history is the river guarding, deep beneath the whispering roots of a southern dynasty? This is a chronicle not just of enduring bondage, but of a calculated, cinematic resistance, a quiet, burning strategy of vengeance where shame and power are the currency. When the chains break, it's often the stillness that finally makes the loudest sound. In the choking humidity of 1840, the Black Cypress Plantation was a world compressed under a massive, unyielding sky. The heat was a tangible thing, clinging to the skin, dampening the cotton in the fields, and muffling every sound but the incessant, mournful screech of the cicadas. The very breath one drew felt heavy, stolen. But for the enslaved men, there was one strange, perverse moment of reprieve, a dark ritual held every Monday night, the bathing hour. When the plantation's bell tolled 8 and the overseer retreated, slurring to his whiskey, the men were required, not allowed, but required, to cleanse themselves in the river that snaked behind the dense cane fields. They were always naked, always illuminated by the indifferent moon. It was an act framed as simple necessity, yet everyone knew the truth. It was surveillance stripped bare, a grotesque masquerade of civility. The master, Silas von Hargrove, was watching. No one dared to utter his name. No one turned their head toward the cluster of trees where the Spanish moss hung like the heavy curtains of a dark confessional, but they felt his presence. He was there, quiet as the cypress trunks, patient as the slow, inevitable creep of time. Drinking in the sight, Elias, only 23, had come to the bathing ritual that spring, his skin freshly scarred with the estate's hateful brand. His body, taut and scarred, was a testament to years of subtle, unyielding rebellion against the spiritual collapse that had consumed others. He was a creature of profound silence, but silence, in his case, was not submission. It was a shield, and Silas von Hargrove, with his keen, twisted vision, had recognized it instantly. The first time Elias stepped into the water, Silas's gaze was fixed, an almost feverish hunger tracing the chords of his back and the steady, solemn pace of his immersion. It was not merely lust. It was the raw, old hunger of the South for absolute dominion, a power fantasy twisted by a sick devotion to ownership. While the other men had learned to shrink in the moonlight, splashing to blur their forms, to make themselves insignificant, Elias did the opposite. He stood in the river, water only to his waist, perfectly still. While the others dunked their heads or offered nervous, forced laughter, Elias remained upright, solemn, unmoving. He offered Silas no comfort, only the sharp, unblinking edge of acknowledgement. He did not make himself small. He made himself a monument. By the third Monday, the illusion of routine shattered. A boy named Jonah, barely 17, stumbled out of the woods, sobbing soundlessly. No physical mark of violence, just a deep, terrifying silence that seemed to twist the air around him. The men closed ranks instinctively. Elias said nothing, but the dam had broken. The ritual continued, but the air was now thick with a deeper fear, one fed by rumors. Silas's own father had indulged in the same vile custom. It was a sickness passed down through the Hargrove bloodline, masked by French literature and Southern decorum. The locked library, full of books no one was permitted to read but everyone feared, was the silent heart of this degeneracy. Elias now began to wait. He would linger at the river's muddy edge, scanning the brush, not with the look of a frightened man, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a predator mapping his territory. The river, once a place for cleansing, had become a mirror reflecting the face of the watcher. And in Elias's iron stillness, a force older than revenge began to take shape, forming just beneath the placid surface of his calm. The river was patient, and Elias was waiting. The plantation house loomed like a forgotten idol, and the library, tucked deep within its belly, was the sanctum of its dark heart. The air inside smelled of old paper, stagnant smoke, and a secret that had seeped into the very leather of the furniture. No enslaved person was meant to cross that threshold. But late one Thursday, Ruth, the house cook, delivered a message with a voice that was not her own. "Master Silas requires you in the library. Now." Her eyes avoided Elias, placing the words into his hands like a fragile, burning coal. The house was unnaturally quiet, its thick Charleston rug swallowing every footstep. Elias walked alone, knowing the way from a single brutal memory of punishment. The library door was already ajar. Silas sat by the fire, a book untouched in his lap, a glass of dark liquor gleaming on the chair arm. He didn't look up immediately. When Elias finally stepped into the room, the master's voice was a soft, dangerous murmur. "You read, Elias?" Elias offered no reply. The question was a formality. Silas finally looked at him, an unnerving gaze that seemed to probe past skin and muscle. "No, of course not. But I believe you listen well." A dense, heavy pause settled, filled with the unspoken agreement of their perverse reality. Silas gestured to the chair opposite, but Elias remained standing, his posture a defiant, quiet challenge. Silas offered a smile that grew in the shadows. "You're a beautiful man, Elias. Has anyone ever told you that?" Still, Elias was stone. The master rose, slow, deliberate, crossing the room like a priest approaching a cursed altar. He did not touch Elias, but stopped close enough for the heat of his body to radiate. "Not all chains are made of iron," Silas whispered, a final seductive poison. "You could have a better life." But Elias, standing in the lion's den, knew the truth. The softest chains are always the hardest to break, and the story of Broken Chains Chronicles was about to begin. The final violating line of the test was a touch. Silas's hand landed light as ash upon Elias's chest, fingers tracing the line upward to the sharp curve of his jaw, a contact that pretended to seek permission while asserting absolute ownership. The kiss that followed was brief, restrained, devoid of feeling, yet it carried the crushing weight of possession. It was not passion, it was a pure, cold assertion of power. Elias did not flinch. His face remained a mask of carved granite, and Silas, reading this profound stillness as acceptance, was visibly pleased. "You will return here when I call," the master murmured, a promise and a threat entwined. "No one needs to know. I reward loyalty and discretion." Elias left the library without a single word. Stepping back into the common hallway, the air felt suddenly colder. Though he had walked out physically untouched, his status had irrevocably shifted. The bread he now received was softer, his tasks lighter, his burdens lessened by a terrible shadow. To the other enslaved people, he was no longer one of them. Some looked with bitter envy, others with a fear that kept them distant, but Elias had not changed. Only the road he walked had been made slick with danger. He spent his nights on the floor of his cabin, eyes wide and unblinking in the suffocating dark. His body remembered the hand, the mouth, the breath of the man who genuinely believed himself a god. But Elias was not broken. He was listening. He was learning. Silas had mistaken silence for submission. The master had just placed a weapon in the hand of the man he sought to own, beyond the neatly ordered cotton fields. Where the land gave way to the tangled, whispering chaos of the bog, lived a woman claimed by no one and feared by most. Her name was Mommy Rue. Whispers trailed her like mist. Some said she was as old as the plantation itself. Others swore she had arrived from Haiti, carried by rusted chains that never truly fell away. She answered to no master's ledger, and she never bowed her head. Her cabin was crooked, softened by moss, its door eternally ajar. Most kept their distance, but Elias was guided by a profound instinct. When he finally stood at her threshold, she did not rise. She merely turned her head, revealing eyes clouded with milky cataracts, yet she saw him, not with vision, but with a knowing that cut deeper than sight. "You carry his scent," she declared, her voice low and textured, but not his mark. Elias, true to his nature, said nothing. Mommy Rue gestured to a stool. "Sit, boy, let me listen." He spoke little, but every word he offered she wove into a comprehensive meaning. She asked no questions about the library, the kiss, or his sudden dark favor. She already knew. Instead, she told him stories of pure, ravenous hunger, not for food, but for dominion, of how it shapes a man's essence and how certain men feed not on flesh, but on the absolute silence of others. She spoke of the rot in the Hargrove bloodline. Silas, she confirmed, was not the first. His father had built the small chapel near the swamp's edge, calling it a place of prayer. But Rue remembered the nights the windows glowed with candlelight and the sounds that rose from it. Sounds like strangled cries, nothing to do with salvation. They were offerings. Rue spoke of a book, bound in deep red leather, hidden beneath the chapel's altar, holding words never meant for human tongues, only for eyes eager for corruption. Silas's father had opened it, and Silas perhaps had done more than read. Perhaps he had become it. There are powers, she whispered, her voice barely a breath, that feed on shame. They feed on secret want, twisted into the iron fist of control. Elias finally broke his silence, asking the inevitable, "What must be done?" She gave no verbal answer. Instead, she reached into the heart of her small fire with a bare, impervious hand and pulled out a burning coal, black and red, like a heart turned to ash. She pressed it into a hollowed bone, then placed the artifact carefully into his palm. "When the time comes," she instructed, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves, "speak nothing. Let the river speak for you." The swamp surrounding them pulsed with the deep, slow breath of things older than the white man's arrival. Elias left the cabin with the bone warm in his hand and a silence that was now heavier, deeper than the one he had carried in. That night he did not sleep. He sat by his own fire, staring at the bone, waiting for it to speak. The faint sounds of the enslaved community drifted through the dark. Murmurs, coughs, the simple echoes of life carrying on beneath the crushing weight of someone else's wicked story. Now, the quiet resistance of Broken Chains Chronicles had its artifact. But Elias was no longer a character in someone else's cruel story. He was now the author of his own, writing in the deep, silent language of the land. On the final Monday of that suffocating summer, the sky hung low and bruised, an oppressive canopy stretching across the horizon. The air was thick enough to taste a metallic tang of iron and moss. The river, swollen from recent rains, moved with a slow, heavy current, as if it too had learned to listen, to wait. Elias stood before the other men that evening, his words few, his presence a palpable force. The bath, he declared, would be delayed. "Let the day die first," he instructed, his voice low but resonant. "Let the river have its stillness." They obeyed without question, even those who had feared him now sensing the profound current beneath his silence, a gravity that pulled them inexorably. He walked alone toward the riverbank, the bone charm from Mami Ru, warm and significant, tucked beneath his shirt, resting against his skin. The wind had died completely, leaving the world suspended in an unnatural quiet. Then, as Elias knew he would, Silas came, not from the worn path, but from the dense, shadowing trees. Always the trees. His boots sank into the wet earth, yet his presence felt weightless, spectral. He said nothing, simply watched Elias undress. There was no fear in Elias's movements, no hesitation. His body was not offered. It was revealed, an intentional, powerful unveiling. Silas stepped forward, a breathless murmur escaping his lips. "I dreamed of this. The river. You. All of it." He reached for Elias's face, but Elias, with a dancer's grace, stepped into the water, waist deep, waiting. Silas followed, boots and all. The river rose to his thighs, then his chest, transforming him, dissolving him into a figure undone, hair damp, clothes clinging, breath shallow. Elias turned to face him fully. The kiss came again, more insistent this time, lingering. But as Silas's hands roamed, Elias's own found the thread around his neck, his fingers curling around the charm, bone warmed by flesh, marked with ash. He did not speak. He only let go. The charm slipped beneath the dark surface, and the river answered. It began as a tremor, not in the earth, but in the water itself. A ripple against the current, then something vast, unseen, moving beneath. It moved not with violence, but with ancient, absolute certainty. Silas pulled back, startled, a nascent fear flickering in his eyes. What happened next defied all reason. Thick, wet roots, older than time itself, rose like grasping arms from the depths. Not fast, not wild, but patient. They coiled around his legs, his waist, his chest. He screamed then, but the river with a silent, hungry mouth swallowed the sound whole. Elias watched, his gaze steady, unwavering. Silas thrashed, begged, invoking saints and ancestors, promising land, gold, even forgiveness. The water listened, the roots tightened, and then silence. The river closed over him, as if a great dark mouth had simply consumed him. Elias stood alone once more. The watcher was gone, swallowed by the very waters he sought to control. When he returned to the clearing, his clothes were damp, his eyes dry. The others waited, a silent circle of unspoken questions. Elias offered only this: "The master won't be watching anymore." That night the men bathed without fear. No shadows stirred in the trees, no predatory presence clung to the air. The river, sated, ran quiet beneath the indifferent moon. In the long, locked, rotting chapel, the altar wept a single drop of water, dark as wine. Beneath it, the red-bound book stirred, but no one came for it. Not yet. 3 days passed before the world beyond the plantation truly registered Silas von Hargrove's absence. His spectral void echoed through the big house, a misplaced note in an ancient dying hymn. No orders were barked, no whips cracked, no chilling shadow fell across the fields at dusk. The overseer, too drunk or too superstitious to question the sudden profound silence, remained in his cabin, nursing his hangovers and pointedly avoiding the riverbank. Then came the knock. A man in city-cut black clothes, thin as a page and twice as sharp, arrived from Savannah, documents clutched in his hand. He exhibited no grief, asked no questions about Silas's fate. He simply read from a sealed, notarized envelope. In the event of the master's disappearance or death, one Elias was to serve as caretaker of the estate. In trust, the man clarified, as a steward, not an owner. The law, cold and unyielding, had no room for a black man to hold dominion over land, but loopholes, like whispering spirits, threaded through the parchment. Silas had left behind not a legacy, but a trap, a final perverse performance of power, designed to humiliate, to isolate, a cruel joke of posthumous domination. Yet no one laughed. Elias took the heavy keys in silence. The others watched, their eyes wide with a fragile, dawning hope. No harsh orders followed. No punishments were delivered. Work continued, yes, but the very rhythm of the plantation shifted, subtle as a change in the wind. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not sit in the master's ornate chair. He walked the grounds at dawn, alone, speaking to no one but the rustling cane. The library remained locked, the chapel untouched. But things changed. Ruth, long chained to the inferno of the kitchen, began to sleep past sunrise. Jonah, the boy who had once wept silently in the trees, now hummed a quiet tune while mending tools. The older men, cautious as hunted deer, finally lifted their heads when Elias passed, not with fear, but with something new, something closer to belief. The chains were still visible, but the grip had loosened. One night, Elias returned to the river. He stood at the edge, the moon a silver coin above, his reflection a wavering silhouette. Behind him the plantation slept, a different kind of sleep now. He removed his shirt and stepped into the water, not as a sacrifice, not as an offering, but as a silent, powerful reclamation. The river, his silent ally, accepted him, and far beyond the fields, where the swamp began to murmur in languages forgotten by scripture, Mommy Rue's cabin sat empty. No footprints, no farewell, only a hollow in the earth where the fire once burned, and a circle of bones blackened and cracked, hinting at ancient, untold stories. Some whispered she was never real. Others said she simply waited for the next one. In the great house, Elias lit no candles. He sat in the dark, alone, beneath a roof once built to contain him. And in that profound silence, something shifted. Not yet absolute freedom, no, but a sacred space carved out, a profound emptiness where chains once rested. The land, they had always said, remembered. And now so would Broken Chains Chronicles.